Well, here we are. The wild card series are all set, and the first few.
Did they actually happen? They were kind of like boring.
They were pretty quick and tidy affairs. Not all of them went the way that we expected, so there were some upsets.
Yes,
and we've had the first games of each of the divisional series, and the second game of the Rangers and Orioles is
underway right now.
Tidying itself up now, with the Rangers having the game mostly well in hand at this point.
I think 11-5 in the ninth inning is pretty comfortable.
Right. I think we can safely assume they will be up 2-0 in this best of 5. So they are well on their way to potentially sweeping the Baltimore Orioles. But let's walk it back to the beginning of this week, and let's walk through each of these wild card rounds, because we had 4 2-0 series.
And it's so many people, I've been hearing this week about the fact that, well, why even bother having a best-of-3 series when teams are going to go 2-0, and we should just go back to the one-game playoff in the first place?
Honestly, I feel that a little bit more, because I think I know the Mets won a game.
They were the only one to win last year of the 4.
Okay. And then this year, nobody did. So you've only had one 3-game series out of all of these. So I do have actually a little bit more sympathy to the idea. I'm more open to having the idea of the 3 division winners, and then you have the 2 wild cards playing game 163 to be the 4th team.
And that's it.
That's it.
Of course, we know that this is a pipe dream because there's no way Major League Baseball is giving up this revenue.
Right. No, they're not giving up the revenue. They're not giving up having an extra week of playoffs and extra series.
And I still go back to the fact that it was exciting at the end of the season to see the Mariners not make it and to see the Rangers and
but you would
the
still
Astros.
have that with the wild card 2 and 3. That would not change anything.
Well, but that extra wild card made a difference, I think, in each league in the last days of the season.
You're always going to have a race unless it's only division champions, most likely.
And the complaints are basically that 40% of the teams, as we've said many times on this podcast, are making the playoffs, and so the only way that changes is if you have more teams and you don't change the amount that get in.
Right.
So if you have...
But it's a long road to getting a lot more teams. I don't think we're in the process. We're not going to be adding 6 new teams anytime soon.
No, but if you had 2 more teams, at least you'd have 32 teams and 12 would make it. So now you're down to under 40, 36%. Not as bad. And then somebody made the idea that you could have, this is an idea, right, that there'd be 8 4-team divisions, 4 in each league. Mm-hmm. And then you have the 2 teams, and you can basically play them out. That the lowest seed, the best team gets the worst team, and then the other teams play off. And so you're cutting your playoff teams from 12 to 8. I just don't see Major League Baseball doing that.
You get the first 2 teams in each division make it, and then it just.
Now you're in the National Hockey League, basically, and I just think they need to grow up to get 30, like you said, 36 is a long way from where 32, maybe 34, and have the 12 teams make it. I think it'll be more valuable. Mm-hmm. So, the wild card series, haven't worked out the way that they hope. We expected these really exciting series, and you were saying...
Well, I think I expected that we would get maybe 1. I think the thing was, I didn't expect the Marlins and the Phillies series to be exciting, if I'm being honest.
Well, not exciting, but these games took place in Philadelphia. So they, in fact, the thing we noticed is that obviously all the games take place in the higher seeded teams' ballpark. So would seem to be a premium, right? That's
a big advantage.
You would think, except that the away team
won in a couple cases.
Exactly. So I think it's difficult, to evaluate that. 3 games, should it be 5 games? I think 3 games is okay.
I think 3 games is fine. It's better than 1, certainly.
I agree.
5 games, I think, would be too many, and it would be way more likely to lead to having really wacky layoff times.
So I think you go back to Madison Bumgarner beating the Mets in 2016 after they went to the World Series in 2015 in the 1-game playoff, and Connor Gillespie, I think, was the guy who got the big hit, and the Mets were done, and that was it. 1 game, 1 and done.
That was game 163, and I think that was a little bit better because this week felt very played out. Like none of the game. I think it was the problem is that you didn't really have that exciting of games.
Right. These were what I guess there were 8 games. These were 8 of the more boring playoff games you could ever come across.
There was maybe 1 or 2 close games across all of them.
And so that's why people are going, well, why even bother playing the 3 games? Why just play one? And if they're going to be boring like this,
I don't really want to watch a boring playoff series where, in some of the cases, it felt like the expected team won.
Right. So, you get out of the wild card series, and we're in the division series now. And what they didn't do, and I keep hearing about now, is they didn't reseed. And I wanted to ask you about that idea that, okay, really, the Dodgers should be playing, not necessarily the Diamondbacks.
They should be playing the Phillies. The Braves should be playing the Diamondbacks. I think it makes sense because theoretically, depending on where teams finish, you could argue that it actually becomes beneficial to finish 6th over 4th or 5th at a certain point.
But in a reseeding situation, that becomes less of a factor.
It becomes less of a factor because in a reseeding situation, you will always it removes. I think reseeding makes it the fairest thing possible.
I kind of feel that way too, and so you look at that they're not doing that. I think that's something that they might look at changing in the future.
If you're going to keep it at this 8-team tournament,
it's only the second year of this.
I think if you're going to keep it with this many teams making the playoffs,
6 in each league, right?
6 in each league, reseeding after the first round makes sense because it's more fair to the team that got the best record.
Okay, and so if you look at the teams that aren't going forward, let's talk about them, right? They got to the wild card series. You went all in to try to get there in some cases, and your season ended in 2 games, and you're done. So if you're the Blue Jays,
well, that's all of the teams. They all ended.
Well, I'm just saying, but if you're the Blue Jays, if you're the Blue Jays, and you had a tough division to, you made it in, you had to feel good about, getting one of this, and I think people were really mad at. The manager John Schneider for pulling out Berrios,
that was a weird decision.
in that game, and of course it backfired on him, and they lost the game. So now he's sort of like, oh, is this the guy we really want managing our team? And so I would think the Blue Jays, was that a successful season for the Blue Jays or not? Did that just end?
I think a lot of how bad they feel about this season is going to depend on how the Twins play the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
If the Twins play the Astros really tough or even beat them in the series, losing your series to the Twins doesn't feel as bad because right now I think it has to be very frustrating if you're the Blue Jays. This was probably not what you describe as a successful season.
And when it came
you
down,
have higher aspirations for yourself as a team.
You didn't get quite the pitching that you were getting great pitching from Berrios and you pulled him out of the game. That's a really hard situation to deal with if you're a Blue Jay fan. And if you look at the other series in the American League, the Rays, they were the best team, right? They were through 30 games. They were like a historic team.
Right, but when you look at the number of guys that they lost throughout the season. McClanahan, gone.
Rasmussen,
gone.
Tyler Glasnow didn't pitch for half the season. Wander Franco, yeah.
Wander Franco.
Well, that's a whole different situation.
Which I think, but the fact that he is gone, yes, we don't talk about it because we don't want to kind of glorify what he was doing, but he was still a big part of that team and a very good player.
Did you see his stats for the season? They were really, really good.
Right, so suddenly not having him.
And for a team that seemed to lack a little offense when it came to the playoffs.
I think that really hurt them.
I think that was a big loss. So if you're the Rays and you just made the deal for this new stadium, and you would think they would have had all this momentum going into the wild card series, and they laid a big fat egg.
And they got no fan support.
No, they got 19 and 20,000 for both games.
They had less fans for the game where they were eliminated than the Royals did for their last game of the season.
That's the Royals, folks.
Who were last place team.
Right, 100 losses, if I'm not mistaken.
100 losses, last place team drew more for their final game than the Rays did, who were in the playoffs.
But I lay most of the Rays' fallibility on injuries. I mean, all those pitchers being injured just really were too much for them.
If you look over at the National League, I think you kind of have a similar situation where you have one team that, okay, it was a successful season because you made the playoffs in the Marlins.
I know who you're talking about.
The Marlins made the playoffs. That for them was a success. They got eliminated in 2 games by the Phillies, but the Phillies are really good and would basically be.
Didn't that have a whole older brother kind of thing going on with the Phillies and the Marlins?
It was kind of just like, okay, we're going to put you in your place now. And then for the Brewers, very disappointing end to the season to lose in 2 games like that to the Diamondbacks.
Well, not only that, I mean, it first started when they lost Brandon Woodruff for the playoffs and with a shoulder injury just before the wild card series started.
That had to
take your, and then your guys, right, go out and pitch, and they really, your studs, Corbin Burns was good, but not great. Freddie Peralta was good, but not great when they needed it.
And they yacked up that first game. Devin Williams threw 31 pitches and they lost.
So there it is. It's the other pitcher. So, he was a guy that we had talked about in a podcast saying that he was another contender for a Cy Young in in terms of his advanced statistics.
Yes.
Right. So he blows it. Burns blows it. Peralta doesn't pitch well. And you're going to lose.
And so now we've had the first game of each of the divisional rounds with the Phillies taking it over the Marlins in game 1. And I think the Phillies taking over the Braves in game 1. And I think if you're the Braves, the fact that you lost game 1 with Spencer Strider pitching at home, you have to be a little worried now. Right?
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly a Cy Young contender, and the Rangers started the Phillies started Ranger Suarez, and so
the fact that you were able to get a win against Strider when you didn't have Nola or Wheeler going,
who are still going to go and pitch now, and I think the Braves are in a little trouble, although I wouldn't bet against those Braves.
I could see the Braves who ripped 3 in a row.
And they're gonna go and play not tonight. They're tomorrow night, right? Is their Monday night? They're going to play their second game.
And the D-backs just sort of ambushed the Dodgers last.
Well, they ambushed Clayton Kershaw.
Right. They jumped on him.
So we were sitting here talking yesterday about Clayton Kershaw. Well, he's going to go out and give you at least 5 innings of scoreless or 1-run ball and all that kind of stuff.
Didn't even make it out of the first inning.
I think he got 1 out in the whole game. So I mean, that's just an all-time. And it made me think of Tommy Glavine. Right, with that playoff game that Tommy Glavine...
the game against the Marlins.
Well, the playoff game.
Which one?
It was a late season game. Right. You're right, the late season game that Tommy Glavine kind of puked up.
The final game of the year against the Marlins where he gave up 7 runs.
So you had a Hall of Fame pitcher, and here you had a Hall of Fame pitcher. And, and Clayton Kershaw's pitched a bunch of good playoff games, although he had a playoff problem for a long time until more recently. So, and watching him hang his head in the dugout, and I do think he'll come back. Well, it won't take much to pitch a better game after the game he pitched yesterday. Whatnot, but the Diamondbacks ambushed him, and they ambushed him. Not with Zach Gallen on the mound.
No, with Merrill Kelly. So if you're the D-backs, you have to be thinking, okay, wait a second, we got to win without our guy. Now they don't have the second guy behind Gallen nearly to the same.
The guy you pitched yesterday,
right? But he's I'm just thinking, I think that having 3 guys in the playoffs is probably a little overrated.
Oh, you were talking about this
in terms of your staff. I think that's why the Phillies are well constructed because you've got Wheeler and Nola for your postseason series, and in a 7-game series, they're going to give you 4 starts. And so really what you need on your rotation isn't necessarily guys capable of having the stuff to give you Wheeler or Nola starts in the playoffs. You need guys that are going to eat innings to help you get there. And I think the Phillies picking up guys like Ranger Suarez and Taijuan Walker these innings during the season were a really big deal for them because if you're the Phillies, you're thinking, okay, we'll pick up 2 or 3 games that Nola and Wheeler are starting. And then if it comes to the other 3, well, we're facing their 3rd and 4th guys. We'll take that chance with our lineup.
Well, I think you make a really interesting point because the benefit is, and I said this just today, so the Phillies last year, they went to the playoffs, and what we learned about the Phillies was their bullpen was a lot better than it had been, obviously, which we'd always had a bad time with the Philly bullpen. They were good last year. Sir Anthony Dominguez.
And they're good this year.
And they're very good. Alvarado. So, they're good, and this year, now, by having Taijuan Walker and Suarez pitched into games, it saves the bullpen from having to overuse those guys that lead up to those guys.
Right, and I think that's going to be something that if we look over at the American League could really come back to hurt the Orioles in Game 3. Because now they've had 2 games in a row where their starter did not make it deep into the game.
And Grayson Rodriguez looked really good on the mound with the 100-mile-an-hour stuff and moving on. They just hit it.
They just hit it. They got hits.
So, yeah, I think that the Phillies, you make a really good point about the 3rd starter not being as important in the playoffs. And if you think of some of the teams that are still left, right, in the Braves and the Dodgers in particular, their starting pitching has been sort of decimated by injuries all season.
The Phillies have to be looking the same with the Diamondbacks have to be thinking, there's a real chance we could be playing in the NLCS. And I think that's why you can't count out a team like the Astros because they have Framber Valdez and Justin Verlander.
He's pitching tonight, right? Framber Valdez.
They have that same kind of top of the rotation strength with a really solid bullpen. But the team they're going against has two really good starters too, in Sonny Gray and Pablo Lopez. So Minnesota needs to kind of strike back in order to have a shot in this series.
It was kind of a throwdown last night by the Astros, right? So let's say the Astros, they've kind of meandered along, haven't played well at home, although I think they're undefeated in 18 straight or 11 home playoff games. Okay, but they've been bad at home this season.
And they've been, yeah.
Okay, and so the first pitch of the playoffs in their ballpark, Altuve hits a home run.
Yeah.
Okay, and then their other guy who was hurt for a lot of the season, but still was in a ridiculously good season, even when he did play, is Yordan Alvarez. He doesn't hit one home run; he hits two.
And I think if you're the Astros kind of have that same invincibility aura that the Dodgers had from like 2019 to 2021, where you just kind of expected them to run roughshod through the National League. Like, you're like, it doesn't really matter how well they're playing. You know they're going to show up in the
so
playoffs.
Many guys, right? So last night it was Alvarez and Altuve. Tonight maybe it's Bregman
and Kyle Tucker.
So
I think that until
just so many guys.
Like right now, the Dodgers are so injured on the pitching staff. The Diamondbacks don't really have to beat them straight up as much because they're going to lose. They lost a game last night where Kershaw just pitched bad.
Right.
And they might lose again because they just don't have good pitchers to go. You're going to have to just beat the Astros. They're not going to give you a free game in a series.
And it's you mentioned that, and I'm thinking about the Dodgers lineup and the way they're playing, and thinking, is there a way that you can pitch around Freeman and Betts and say, I'm going to let Max Muncy and Chris Taylor beat me?
If they're not getting on base
Will
like
Smith?
they have at the beginning of this year and throughout this year, then yeah, you can kind of dodge around them a little bit.
It's kind of hard to do that with the Braves, even though
you can't do that with the Braves as much.
So Jason Stark had all this stuff today, in his column, and so the Braves had not been shut out at home the entire season, right? We keep talking about they're the greatest hitting team
and then they get
of
shut
all
out
time.
in the first
and the first game in their own ballpark in the playoffs, they get shut at home.
It's
so
killer.
Spencer Strider was something like 8-0 against the Phillies, and he loses, just like Clayton Kershaw was like 9-0 against the Diamondbacks, and he loses. So, as he says, that's baseball, right? So you think, but for sure, Strider's going to dominate the Phillies, for sure.
Well, I wouldn't have said for sure he's going to dominate.
He didn't.
Phillies.
He didn't get very far into the game, actually.
I think if you're now,
well, actually, he pitched okay.
The big advantage is the Braves can win a game by mashing somebody to death. Their lineup can just be just unstoppable in a game, and they can win. But it's a 5-game series, so losing game one, I feel like, is so much more impactful than losing game one in a 7-game series.
Do you think that there is a reason to consider going away from this first-round series entirely, the wild card series that we just said, or making it a 1-game playoff and playing 7-game series all the way through, 3 7-game series?
I would like it more.
It's a truer test?
It's a truer test. It's more baseball between better teams, and 7-game series are fun. But I understand the worry that if you get sweeps in long series, it could just go forever, the playoff.
Yeah, and
you could have a lot of nights where there's only one playoff game going, and I think that's what they're trying to avoid, because you don't want to have like three. You have a 5-game series and a 4-game series in one league, and then a 4-game series and a 7-game series in the other, and now you've got 2 or 3 nights where there's either no baseball or one baseball game on because you can't go to the next series yet.
And they've got it pretty well lined up, right? We've got a 5-game, if it goes the distance in these next series, such that the league championship series starts on the weekend coming up here.
It starts on the weekend coming up, and they've got the teams alternating games so that no team gets an unfair rest advantage over the other.
And the World Series, I think,
unless they end the series,
starts a week later on that following weekend. So, you got to think that, the teams that, like you said, got the first game have a real advantage, but mashing teams, I think, are going to have. So I think the Braves and the Dodgers have probably a better chance than the Orioles and the Twins.
I tend to agree, though. I do think it's interesting that 3 of the winners out of the 4 games are teams that came up from the wild card rounds and had already been playing a little bit. I think that
the layoff, you're saying?
Layoff might. It'll be interesting to see.
Interesting. If it was just a one-game playoff, they wouldn't have as long a layoff.
Exactly.
so that's an interesting way of looking at it. We had a couple, and I was listening today to a couple of guys on Sirius talk about the Padres, and I know that they're out of the playoffs. I didn't make the playoffs this year, but how they said so. Preller kept his job, and Bob Melvin kept his job in San Diego, and so there was some saying that somebody should. I mean, and what they pointed out, and that the Padres were like one of the greatest underachieving teams of all time. So whose fault is that? Is the manager?
No, I think the same way you have teams that that have lucky years where everything just kind of goes right. 2021 Giants are that kind of team where, like, when you look at that team in the span of all of their other seasons, it's a total outlier in terms of how well they performed. And, guys had years that year that they never had again. They were unbelievable in run games. You don't look at that team and then when they go back to being normal that, they're being mismanaged or they're being better managed that year. So I think with the Padres, you would say, that the GM and the coach failed this year. They just had a supremely unlucky year, and you'd expect them to not suffer to that same degree. It's the reason why if you had to pick a team that didn't make the playoffs to make the playoffs this next season, you pick the Padres. And if you were going to pick a team that did make the playoffs this year that you think won't make it next year, you would pick the Marlins because they were so good in one-run games and they had the worst run differential, like I think of any playoff team ever, that you got to think like, 20 games over in one-run games and a really bad run differential, that screams to me regression next season.
Well, it's kind of why I have Skip Schumacher near the top or at the top of my list for manager of the year. But I'm a little surprised, and that just tells you how much they respect Bob Melvin as a manager, because I think it were anybody else to lose all those one-run games, right? And to have Machado and Soto and Bogarts and all these guys in your team and not win and outscore the opposition over this.
Well, I think the thing is,
did the manager have anything to do with that?
A lot of those guys were stinking up the joint this year. Bogarts was bad for a lot of this year, and I think that's part of the reason why it's easier not to blame Melvin, because it's just like, what you're going to say.
You have the Cy Young Award winner as a pitcher. You have the best reliever in the league in Josh Hader, possibly.
One-run games are finicky, and you were unusually bad in them this year. But I don't understand how you're a manager is supposed to get his players to just like stop grounding into double plays late in games.
Well, and the San Diego management obviously said, we're going to run it back with the same guys.
Right.
And that's unusual, I think, to a degree. There was no scapegoat.
That's what you do, though. It's the same way that we as Met fans were saying, you know what, they probably weren't as good as their record was last year. They probably weren't as bad as their record were this year. You would think that the San Diego Padres were not as bad as their record indicated this year.
Okay, I'll go with that. But the Mets, conversely, right, not only did Buck Showalter lose his job, which we already talked about, but Billy Epler stepped down this week as general manager.
Well, I think that has less to do with the job he did this year and more to do with David Stearns wanting to bring in his own guy.
Or being probed for the use of the injured list. Now both Steve Cohen and, I guess, Billy Epler are under scrutiny for that. And
I think for more, it's that you bring in your president of baseball operations. He's going to want to pick his GM. He's going to want to pick his manager.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I just think it's just a different philosophy that the Padres will bring back their two guys.
They're
and the
also
Mets,
much older.
What does that mean?
Well, think about the Mets are actually a pretty young team now that they've moved on.
Well, now they are, yeah.
Now that they've moved on from Verlander and DeGrom. So bringing in the right manager makes a lot more sense there, whereas you've got a lot of veterans with that Padres team. So swapping out your manager, I think keeping continuity makes a little bit more sense there, I feel like, because you're really just running it back and saying, I think the only reason why that we were bad this season was just poor luck in, us hitting not well.
Yeah, I don't
unclutch.
Yes, well, that is to a degree what happened. I just feel like it seems like any other team that had that kind of talent like the Padres did versus the Mets, who just played bad, and yet you don't really blame Buck Showalter,
right?
But he lost his job.
Right, exactly. Well, Buck lost his job, I think, because they didn't want him anymore.
Well, right, and he had a philosophical difference with the way that David Stearns does things, and I think there's probably, I'm going to guess, it has a little something to do with analytics versus sometimes I want to play my hunches the way I want to play him because I've been in this game a long time.
And I just get a feeling about a guy in a matchup or
and Billy Epler, had the problem of them outing him this week a little bit with Buck Showalter, saying that he made Buck play Daniel Vogelbach.
Right,
that was bad.
That felt like the Mets kind of selling
setting him up.
Yeah, selling Epler down the river with the fans to make sure that they were going to be totally okay with him going. Because that was basically the magic words for every Met fan to be like, oh, okay, it was his fault? Yeah, okay, it was definitely Billy Epler's time to go.
So we're over a week and change behind the season, but Pedro Grifol still has his job. Ali Marmol still has his job. Phil Nevin doesn't have his job. And I'm thinking, okay, so the Angels are going to change the manager. Do you have any idea, though, like what direction, like by changing the manager? You know what? His name was brought
His
right
name
up.
was floated.
He actually put his name in to go and manage it. And so why would I can't figure the Angels out at all. You know what? I can't even. I can't even.
The Angels, you have no idea where they are as a team because right now, for all intents and purposes, Shohei Ohtani is a free agent and Mike Trout is on the team. Where they're both on the team last season.
Right.
If there's a very real possibility
that neither one of them will be there
on the team next season. In which case, you're just looking at a completely different reality for the Angels. I think it would be hard to kind of predict what that job is going to be. But I think whoever is going to be brought in as manager is going to need to know what the status of the team is and what their intention is. More specifically, when it comes to Mike Trout.
So speaking of managers, we've watched a whole round in the wild card. We've watched a day and a half, if you will, of the division series. Have you noticed anything any manager did that impacted a game in any particular way? No, I don't.
No, I think
I don't.
But we've talked about this before. It's really hard to pick out any individual action because anything you're going to be evaluating is just results-based analysis.
Like lifting Berrios too soon from the game, right? So the one thing you do if it doesn't work out, but it's not like, oh yeah, I pinch hit this guy and all of a sudden he got a hit, so I'm a genius.
Right. We don't really look because if he did it right, then he's just using the data, and if he did it wrong, well, he listened to the data.
Right. So does Bruce Bochy get a lot of credit for playing Evan Carter now? Like, did you even hear of this guy before?
No.
And the guy is having an amazing run and looks terrific out there. Didn't even play, before Labor Day, basically. And so I think, does Bochy get credit for putting the guy in the lineup every day and having confidence in him?
I mean, I don't know. It just feels like we're just trying to be like, oh well, what do we
got to give him some credit for doing something, right?
Right. The thing with
filling out the lineup card,
right? Being a manager, the only credit that you get is if your team wins the World Series. Is your team a consistent playoff team, and is your team winning the World Series? That's really where you make your mark as a manager.
So in his first year, he can't possibly do that at Bochy and the Rangers.
But that's why you don't normally fire guys after only a season unless there's some type of other dysfunction that's permeating the team. I want to look at a guy like, how often is my manager taking me to the postseason? And if that's box number one. Then if he is able to do that, then box number two is he able to win the World Series?
Right, and Bochy has proven that he's been able to not only do that, but they're going to be up 2-0. They're 2-0 here in Baltimore in the first two games. You got to be
feeling good if you're the Rangers.
You got to be feeling really good because, if you would have said before the season, okay, we're going to have Jacob deGrom, but we're going to lose him to injury. So we're going to trade for Max Scherzer.
We're also going to lose him to injury.
We're going to lose him to injury. And we're still going to be able to be 2-0 in the Baltimore ballpark for a team that won more games in the league than anybody else.
Go back to Texas to try and clinch a spot in the ALCS. Yeah, you would take that in a heartbeat.
The Astros better be careful.
Oh, yeah.